This week, Kalshi rolling out what it's calling its midterms hub to help users see speculated results and polling averages in one place. The launch coming just a day after the Wisconsin Elections Commission, I should say, warning voters that placing bets on elections they plan to vote in is illegal in the state. Joining us right now to discuss this and so much more is Brian Quintenz. He is the former CFTC commissioner, Kalshi Exchange board member, and senior advisor to the Coalition for Prediction Markets. So, of course, you are in favor of what's going on in terms of all of this. Let's talk about Wisconsin as a sort of microcosm of a lot of the questions going on in the country about how prediction markets should be used, whether they can be manipulated, and how we should all be thinking about this.
Big questions there.
There's a lot of questions there, but when you saw the news on Wisconsin, for example, what did you think?
Well, these are new markets, so I don't think it's a surprise that states are grappling with a lot of these issues from what the laws are that have been on their books for a long time. But in my mind, federal preemption is supreme when it comes to federally regulated derivatives markets. And there are a couple examples there that I think are informative. And the first is, Michigan has a law on its books from 1931 that prevents its citizens from trading in grain futures, back when it thought doing so represented gambling. Now, if it tried to enforce that on its citizens, I think we would all think this is ridiculous, right? But just because these markets are new, I think it's just part of our process to debate, what the role is of a federal law versus the state law. But in my mind, this is an overstep by Wisconsin.
Okay, so here's a question. I'm going to posit something to you for just a second. Mm-hmm. There's an argument to be made that when people look at the prediction markets unto themselves, wherever something stands, as an election is taking place, that it can influence their decision to vote at all because maybe they think it's a runaway situation and the person that they were going to vote for is otherwise going to win anyway, so they don't even show up at the voting booths, or that they're not going to vote, or they're going to vote for the other person, meaning that the actual sort of where things stand, the horse race itself, can influence what people's actions. And I would actually say journalists, interestingly, like the day of an election, oftentimes hold back in terms of what they report and when they report it, in part because they want people to go to the polls, to do it honestly, and not to influence the outcome. And I'm curious what you think about that distinction.
I don't think it's a lot different than what the arguments are around that with polling, to be honest. Sure, prediction markets provide more real-time information to people, but I think you also have to understand what the benefits of that are so that people can incorporate what a market's view is. And it's different. Polling
right.
and markets are different, right? Polling is asking someone, what do they want to have happen? Whereas a market is asking, what do you think will happen?
What's interesting, though, is the last election, or last several elections, sometimes the prediction markets have been more accurate than the polls.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think it forces people to take more of a dispassionate view of what they think the outcome's going to be.
Let me take this back. To me, at least, the market mechanism, the data that comes out of this what it means is fascinating and you could argue beneficial in many, many ways. Mm-hmm. The question, I think, is a slightly different one, which is ultimately, does it and can it impact the outcome of an election because it has an effect on what voters ultimately do and whether we think philosophically that is a good or bad thing, and whether polls are different. By the way, people don't typically run polls midday, like people hold those polls back. Mm-hmm. You don't hold those polls back. I understand why that's beneficial to the marketplace. I'm wondering whether you think it's beneficial to the electoral process.
I mean, I just come from a philosophical perspective that I think we have to trust people exercising their own self-interest. And if they are going to vote based on that, then I think a poll or a market isn't going to dissuade them from doing it. And if they don't care enough to do it and that's something that would influence it, then I think that's their decision to make. But I think this is a critical new piece of data and information that is market-derived that can inform and, in some cases, lower polarization as opposed to have negative impacts.
On the self-interest piece, that it's, people should do what in their own self-interest, they should go to the polls and the like. One of the other things I think people wonder about, and this gets to the manipulation question, if somebody is wealthy enough and self-interested enough to decide they want to put a big bet, especially maybe not on a presidential poll, since that is probably going to have hopefully a lot of volume, if you will, but maybe on a smaller campaign, but wants to demonstrate that one person is way ahead or what, and thinks that that can affect people's self-interest. On the other side, how should we think about that?
So I think that's why it's important to recognize that these are markets that are federally regulated, that follow all of the same rules as traditional derivatives markets. In fact, they are derivatives markets. They're licensed derivatives markets. And there are rules on the books, and they've been on the books for a long time, that require exchanges and require the CFTC to surveil the markets for manipulative conduct. And those cases can be brought, right? Outsized influence is something that occurs in all markets and not just these, right? And those can be flagged by size, by timing, et cetera. So, I don't think we can have the perspective of saying, you need to guarantee that nothing bad could ever happen in these markets, as opposed to saying, try to do your best and then make sure that you prosecute.
But there's also a timing issue. So I don't know if you saw this news. It's another fascinating sort of development also relates to Wisconsin. I don't know if you saw that Elon Musk has been, now it's been said that he likely broke the law when he promised $1 million payouts to voters who were going to support the president in the last election. That's only happening now, meaning part of the question is, yes, things can always go wrong, but it's very hard to police in real time. And we could debate the Elon Musk of it all, but...
Well, I mean, I think the distinction there is when the news is reported versus when the investigation process occurs, right? And we've seen cases of insider trading in prediction markets and in other markets where the news comes out much later than the individual was flagged, the account was frozen, they've been referred, for investigation and prosecution. So just because we're hearing about that now doesn't mean that activity was flagged and is going through a normal judicial investigatory process.
How did you guys catch the teleprompter, the president's teleprompter operator?
Yeah, well, so I think there's a fine line between trying to disclose how a market surveils for activity, because you don't want to tip people off of how to avoid that, versus being transparent. But this was a person who was, taking positions in real time when he saw the president skip over certain words, that were in a speech, patterns of behavior over time. And this is a KYC'd account.
What does that mean, KYC?
It means that the exchange,
exchange
takes the information of who the person is, where they live, employment information, and all of a sudden you can start matching their identity with these trades. I mean, again, these are new markets and they might tempt people to do bad things, but the important part is that they can be investigated, and they can be flagged, and they can be prosecuted.
How much time and energy is spent on trying to make sure that people aren't finding information and getting an edge on the market?
So I think there's a distinction between incentivizing people discovering information and making a market more efficient than using information to benefit themselves over which they have a duty to someone else. I mean, the latter is insider trading.
Does the industry have a list, for example, of what might be described as politically exposed people? So some banks keep lists of what are described as politically exposed people. You would describe, by the way, potentially the teleprompter operator as politically exposed, potentially based on where they work or what they do. But how does that database work in practice?
Yeah, so Kalshi, for instance, bans certain people, certain government officials, congressional staff, cabinet officials, judges, mayors, governors, anyone in an FEC filing, for instance, from participating in the markets.
At all?
At all.
So
at all.
Sports, it doesn't matter what...
Well, and then it can get down to specific, events and specific contracts. So, coaches, referees, people in campaigns, on their own campaigns or areas. So there is an ability to try to preclude certain people from trading on insider information up front, which is more than any exchange in the world does. No other exchange precludes someone from trading in any market based off of that kind of sensitivity. So this is a pretty extraordinary step.
I think it's necessary. You guys are making bets that nobody else makes. I mean, there's a reason that you probably have a higher standard of things that you have to do.
Well, I think it's important for market integrity.
Do you think it's across the board, meaning you're talking about Kalshi. There's, by the way, a big story in the New York Times about sort of the fight taking place between Kalshi and Polymarket. It was a story that really suggested it's not just a fight, but almost a personal fight between the two leaders of those companies and two different approaches even to the regulatory complex.
Well, I mean, I think the reason that I wanted to join this coalition, the reason that I've been involved with Kalshi for the last 5 years is because they took a regulatory first approach. The companies in this coalition have regulatory compliance in their DNA. That's not to say that all companies in this space do, as opposed to taking a position of regulatory evasion and not following the laws on purpose and what bad outcomes that could lead to.
And do you think that's happening?
I do. I think it's obvious.
And which firms do you think are doing that?
Well, I think this story that you described, as well as the story in the Wall Street Journal, talked about offshore firms marketing to U.S. customers when they're not registered, servicing U.S. customers when they're not registered, not having any conflicts of interest rules. I mean, the CFTC has a very robust set of standards and guidelines and regulatory principles for regulated exchanges, from a customer protection, know your customer, reporting obligations, conflicts of interest obligations, the quality of contracts that can be listed. And I think it's, at best, an open question whether firms that are based in the United States but claim to be offshore are following those.
One final question has to do with sports, because sports is a big piece of the prediction markets.
Sure.
Gary Gensler, former head of the CFTC back in the day, you know where I'm going with this, made a very interesting comment that when the original rules were put in place to allow for prediction markets, that there was no way that any senators who voted in favor of this contemplated that sports would be part of it, given the states that had built their own rules around whether gambling would be allowed or not. I'm curious, as someone who's sat in the seat you've sat in, what you think of that.
Well, I don't know why we're trusting Gary Gensler with interpreting the law, given what we saw him do at the CFTC in exceeding his authority, and then what we saw him do at the SEC in exceeding his authority. And for him to come now, having advocated for the law to be written as broadly as possible, to give himself as much jurisdictional leeway as he could, and say, I'm going to mind read everyone in Congress at that point in time and tell you what they meant. You know, there's a great line from an opinion, a majority Supreme Court opinion written by Justice Barrett, that said, the judicial role is to read text, not minds. And the text is clear.